And this week, I want to start off with something that's not, frankly, really news, but something that I think is actually really important. So, you guys know we're coming into a really scary time in the world when a lot of people are going to be forced out of their jobs. And they're forced out of their jobs because they don't want to give in to vaccine mandates. They all have their personal reasons for it. For some, it's a medical decision. For some, it's they don't like being told what to do and being forced into making decisions against their will. But because a lot of people are being forced into out of their jobs in the next several weeks, I wanted to just make brief mention of this because, to be frank, there are a lot of lies being told by a lot of employers and a lot of people who may be well meaning but are not giving out good advice right now. Now, for those of you who don't know, my background is I am an organizational psychologist. I have worked with human resources departments all over the place for years. I know more than I reasonably should about employment law and about how to navigate different types of situations. And I wanted to bring up this post because this was a conversation I had with an HR pro in California last week when I was talking about some of this stuff on Twitter, saying things like, if you are in a position where your employer is mandating that you get the vaccine, do not quit. Do not quit. You have to wait for them to fire you. Now, no one likes getting fired. I understand that, but it is actually the very best thing for you in this particular circumstance. And we're going to use this to explain why. Now, the advice I was getting here was specific to the state of California because the state of California actually has really wacky employment laws. The state of California has laws that very much heavily favor the employee. So the laws in California are not going to specifically apply everywhere, but this advice is actually generally good advice, even if you don't live in the state of California. And I'm going to explain why. So this person said, for anyone in California, and this is from an HR pro in the state of California, for anyone in California, my advice is to wait for the company to let you go. They are required by law to give you a reason in writing. To avoid any potential suits, they will likely cite at will or lack of work, in which case you would qualify for unemployment. Also in California, companies cannot make employees prove they are vaccinated through a vaccination card, etc. They just have to attest to being vaccinated. So there's that. Now, I think that's really good advice for people in California, but I also want to explain why this is really good advice generally across the board. So, almost every single employee out there is actually an employee at will. The employment at will covers almost everyone. Employment at will is essentially it's a law that says you are employed at the will of the employer. They can fire you at any time for any reason or for no reason at all. Now, it also helps the employee because it also means as an employee, you can quit at any time for any reason or for no reason at all. Now, pre-pandemic and craziness, this is actually a really good thing, right? A lot of employees think that they are obligated to give 2 weeks notice. You are never obligated to give 2 weeks notice. You might have to give 2 weeks notice in order to get your vacation payout. That's a different discussion, but you are never obligated to give 2 weeks notice. In fact, most of the time when I'm advising employees when they're thinking of quitting their jobs, I advise them to give zero notice because what can happen in between when you give your notice and when you actually leave, your employer can start to screw with you. I've seen employers basically backdoor employees who have already given notice to find reason to fire them to withhold certain benefits. So I always recommend that employees, when they're quitting, they do not give 2 weeks notice. They just leave that day. But in regards to the vaccine mandate specifically, at will employment is important because what this person is saying here is that in order to avoid potential lawsuits, employers who are firing employees are probably going to list at will employment or lack of work as the reason for them being fired. And I'm going to bet that this is not just true in the state of California. I'm going to bet that this is actually true in a lot of different places because I think a lot of employers know there are going to be lawsuits about this. There's 100% going to be lawsuits about this. And so, a smart employer, when they're letting go of employees in regards to vaccine mandates, a smart employer is going to list at will employment as the reason that they're letting people go. Now, why is this important? Because a lot of people have been making these big declarations that if you get fired because of the vaccine mandate, you're not going to be able to collect unemployment. Well, guess what? If your employer lists at will employment as the reason they are letting you go, you will absolutely be able to collect unemployment. And this is why, I'm sorry, people who are giving out advice in this area when they do not work in this area, when they're just hearing something on the news and they're getting a little bit bombastic about it, people need to stop. They need to stop. Or if you're in a position where you might be fired from your job because of the vaccine mandates, you need to listen to people who are giving you advice like this HR pro is, because this is actually really good advice. Just because it might be technically because of the vaccine mandate does not mean that that is what your employer is going to list as the cause of your termination. Make sure you document everything in writing, because they very well could choose to say, well, this is just at will employment. That's why we're letting you go. They don't even have to give you a reason. So make sure you get every single thing documented in writing about why they are letting you go, what the cause of it is. You have to make them say it. Smart employers are going to list at will employment, because that is going to dramatically reduce the chance that they're going to have their asses sued after the fact, especially when the lawsuits start, because the lawsuits will absolutely start at some point. So, if you are in this position, I'm so sorry that you're in this position. It sucks. I think we have all, as a collective society, failed you if you are now in a position of losing your job over this goddamn stupid vaccine mandate nonsense. But you have to play this smart. No one can force you to play it smart if you don't want to. And my strong recommendation is that you make them fire you, and you make sure you get documentation about the reason they are firing you. Demand it of them and just see what happens. Listen, worst case scenario, you live in a state of like a state like New York, and they flat out say on your termination that it's because of the vaccine mandate, and then you're probably going to have a problem collecting unemployment. But guess what? You aren't going to get that unemployment if you quit anyway. And if you quit, you're cutting yourself off from that possibility entirely. But if you make them fire you and you make them document the reason that they fired you, and they say it's something like at will employment, or they say it's because of a lack of work, then you're going to be able to collect unemployment, and at least you're going to have that little safety net. I know it's not a guarantee. I know this is a sucky situation, but you have to make the most of what you have. And I really, really wish people who do not understand how to navigate this would frankly stop giving people horrible advice. Okay, Patricia says you can't get unemployment unless you're fired. That is absolutely, well, yeah, that's pretty much right. That's pretty much right. But in this case, we also want to make sure we're documenting the reason for the firing, which we're going to cross our fingers and hope was at will employment. So I just wanted to start with that because I think it's a really important thing that people need to know. And I thought that this was really smart advice.